Hello everyone, my name is Jonathan Ian Manser, and we, as in the Lost Signals, have just returned from Podcast Movement 2018 in Philadelphia. We haven't had the opportunity to all gather together to give our experiences there, so we each sent in an individual recording. First up will be Scott Thoreau, followed by Stephen Hermosi, Christopher Morgan, and then yours truly back in Curmudgeon Corner. Enjoy.
Hello there, Signalites, or maybe Signophiles. I'll get back to that in a second. I am, of course, Scott Thurlow of the Lost Signals, and this is a little experiment based on our recent attending of Podcast Movement 2018 in Philadelphia. So this will be basically my overall impression/experience of what I got up to at the conference, going over a few of the panels I saw, and some of the interesting fellow podcasters and industry members we met while there. But first, let me briefly explain the nature of this experiment. As you may or may not have been able to tell by now, this little recap is completely scripted, and that's a pretty big change up from our regular format where, as you know, we are much more freeform. But the reason being, having just garnered some new perspectives from PCM, we're trying a few new things out that might otherwise be out of our warehouse. So, with that said, allow me to return to the two descriptions I started off with. There were just two somewhat amusing, well, I guess your mileage may vary, of course, but terms I came up with to give any of our fans a sort of nickname. Instead of Trekkies or, whatever, insert other well-known fan-base collective noun here, we'll have our own. It's something I saw on a panel at the conference, and I thought it was a really cool idea. It's nothing, I didn't really actually think of it beforehand, and maybe it's obvious in retrospect, but I do think it makes a lot of sense, and again, I thought it was a neat way to include you all in a more unique and perhaps, again, funny manner. So to segue a bit, speaking of panels, I'll attempt to give a summary or a rundown of some of the highlights, insights, and so forth from the talks I attended. First, I'll say about them, on average, they were, if not objectively, quote, better than last year's, then at least I found myself getting more out of them, the above little idea being just one. So related to that, it also seemed to me that the topics offered this year were a little more robust, and unfortunately I missed some of them I wanted to check out just due to the fact that they were scheduled at the same time, concurrently. But nevertheless, I did manage to hit up about 5 or 6 or so, I believe, and about 3 of them were damn solid. I got some great ideas and notes from. The other 2 were fine. I don't have any specific complaints per se. Just that it's probably always going to be the case that not every talk will be 100% useful or relevant, even if it seems so on the surface. But with that caveat, even talking to the other fellow attendees, the consensus seemed to generally be that the presentations were overall more quality versus last year's, which I agree with. And yeah, it's a good thing for sure. Well done on the organizers' part. So the next big thing I'll focus on is the, in quotes, glamorous side of things, in a sense. This may say something about my own priorities, I suppose, but I don't think it's any secret that we here at the Lost Signals enjoy some partying now and again. So just like last year, PCM had some pretty sweet after parties, and I feel like this is where a lot of the nitty-gritty, like real actual networking gets done. Not that that's specific to this industry at all, but it's just sort of the way it goes down in the world, I guess. But that means we were basically drinking/eating for free to various degrees each night, while hanging out with people we know for sure are at least interested in the world of podcasting, and just listening to their experiences and thoughts on the entire spectrum of topics within it. So that's the really cool part to me. Meeting up with some of the awesome people we met last year, seeing them again, meeting new ones on the spot, just having a conversation about any and all things podcasting, and more often than not, learning something in the process. Of course, you can be a bit cynical about this and say it's all suit-type Hollywood shit, and certainly that aspect exists, but not that we were particularly privy to it. But again, I feel like it's going to happen in any business. Beyond that, there's a true passion and honesty to be found in just going up to somebody, introducing yourself, asking them about their involvement in podcasting, and just going on from there. As I said, we ended up meeting some amazing people, and if the stars align, hopefully we're working on setting something up with a bunch of them soon, and we'll see where that goes. But the point is, the genuine enthusiasm is what I saw and enjoy the most. Sharing that about this activity with somebody at the conference, sure, over a few free beers, but that to me is what excites me the most about PCM. So I think that'll do it for now for me. Like I said, this was a little experiment first and foremost on incorporating some ideas we got at this year's meetup, and that at Podcast Movement once again was an amazing fucking time for sure, and I'm looking forward already to going to next year's, which is going to be in Orlando, and just seeing what comes of everything we're planning in the wake of it. So I've been Scott Thurlow, and you have been the Signalites or Signophiles or whatever term you'd like to invent. I'll see you next time.
Hi there, I'm Steve Hermosi, and this is strange. My co-hosts are missing, and I'm podcasting in my room in my underwear. I hear you're supposed to dress for the job you want. Underwear model. Anyway, I'm popping on to let you know about my experiences last week at Podcast Movement 2018 in Philly. Podcast Movement is divided pretty easily into two important parts. First is sessions. There's so many sessions. Sessions as far as the eye can see. In fact, there are so many sessions, it's impossible to go to all of them. And we missed a couple that I kind of would like to see, but c'est la vie, maybe next time. Anyway, we attended a fairly wide range this year, and without getting too far into the nitty-gritty, I saw a bunch of folks talk about the future of fiction in podcasting and the fascinating world of script writing / producing a fiction show over there, the curation of history podcasts and how to create suspense and surprise around a topic folks are already familiar with. There were 3 podcasts that were talked about for this, which I thought was interesting. The first was Uncivil, about the Civil War. The second was Heaven's Gate, about Heaven's Gate. And the third was Slow Burn, about the Watergate scandal. All people with interesting ideas on the way to create suspense and surprise out of that. Another one I went to was ideas for how to market ourselves. Another was a discussion about, or a panel about freelance editing, which was kind of fascinating for my, on my tech side. We do all of our own editing at this thing, and it's interesting to see other people talk about that since we're mostly in our own little echo chamber here. And the last one was to talk about automation in what we do and trying to make it easier to create and distribute content. I'm going to try and give links in the show notes for most of these speakers. And if you are interested in any of these topics, you can go check it out yourself, guys. But the second part, and I think probably the more important part of Podcast Movement, is the networking. From the vendor floor to the lobby, to the sponsored happy hours, to the after parties. The show is completely designed to get podcasters and podcast adjacent folks into conversations. And it's great meeting people who are as rabid as we are to make content for their audiences and their listeners, and as we are for you, our listeners. And it's a lot of talking. You may notice that my voice is a little bit hoarse. I basically, one of our buddies that we met there said it best when he said that he's just been yelling about podcasts to people for the last few days, and that's kind of how I feel as well. So, we talked and ate and drank our way into so many intriguing new ideas, and I'm really hopeful that they're going to help with what we're trying to accomplish at the Lost Signals. I do want to mention one insane after party specifically. The conference booked out Reading Terminal. If anyone's familiar with Philadelphia, they'll be familiar with Reading Terminal. It's it's basically like a giant food court, and it is a very cool place with lots of very good food. And they booked this whole place out for us, gave us free drinks and free food from a bunch of the stands, and let us go nuts. They had a DJ, they had a live band. It was awesome. Actually, I do want to give a shout out while I'm thinking about it to Amanda Bocci, I believe is her name. She was the vocalist of the band. Very nice. We watched them for a while and got to meet Amanda and had a great conversation. So I will put a link for her, definitely for her band, and go check her out. But yeah, it's events like this and the rooftop party last year, if you remember our recap on that give kind of a brief glimpse into what the glamorous upside of working in this industry could be. Podcast Movement is the biggest conference that we as podcasters have, and throwing a huge party where we get to let loose and feel our community around us is great before going back and going to our homes throughout the world and sitting in our own little bubbles and doing our own little podcasts, where it's not always as easy to sense your peers around you. It's nice to get out and feel that big community, 1,000 people around you, all having a great time, all partying. And it's it's a interesting feeling that we don't get very often as podcasters. But anyway, we met up with a bunch of friends from last year, and we met a lot of new folks, all of whom we had great conversations with, and we're really looking forward to trying to work with them all, keep in touch, and keep pushing our shows and our community to be better and better year after year. That said, I know I'm already looking forward to Podcast Movement 2019. It's going to be in Orlando, and in the meantime, I'll be here talking to you folks and loving it. And till we find each other again, it's time for me to get lost. Thanks, guys.
Hello, this is Chris Morgan with The Lost Signals. I'm just going to share some thoughts I had about Podcast 2018. We were not able as a group to get together to discuss our experiences, so I'm just going to put mine into the mix with the other guys. And even though if we're doing it separately, I was really impressed with this is my first podcast movement. I wasn't there last year, and I was really impressed by the level of camaraderie there is between the podcasters. Growing up, when I was in college, when I was first starting to play music out for actual people, and the one thing I learned being a performer was that other performers, other musicians are not your competition. They're your friends. They're your colleagues. Well, they're colleagues. They're your friend. They could be your friends. Marketing, networking. You're all in the same boat together, so why be enemies? And I was really happy to see that. I mean, I assumed with the podcast movement that was the intent, but you never know what's going to happen when you're actually there on the day. And I was really, really, really happy to see the diversity of shows, the diversity of people, of ideas. And, some people you had a 5-second conversation with. Some people I would end up hanging out with. I met some really great people. And what I liked about it also was you had some professionals there. And you had some people who had a little more experience than I did. But they're all there to share. And at least from the panels I saw, whether you're a professional podcaster who actually built shows and was in LA and they had actors, or you were like us and kind of did things in your home studio, everybody was willing to share. I mean, I don't know how to explain it except for saying that there was a level of, okay, we're all in the same boat. I may have this level of experience here and you may have this level of experience there, but let me share some common traits. Let me help you. All right. For example, the first seminar I went to was with Meg Robinson. And hey, Meg, I'm promoting your shows. And she was talking about music, the importance of music and podcasting. And she talked about music and sound effects and putting it all together. And she really nurtures her shows, and I learned a lot from her. But when I talked to her afterwards, I said, hey, I'm a musician. I do the music for our shows, and I want to do them for others. And she and I were in the same boat, and there was never once a discouraging word. In fact, she's like, hey, let's get together afterwards, exchange information. And it was like that. That was my first class. That was my first experience. And to me, it was really positive because I didn't know what I was doing there, to be honest with you. And then as I went to things like getting sponsors and marketing and so forth, I met so many great people. A lot of people have interview shows and they're all different. The approaches are different. The styles are different. There's a lot of focus I noticed on local shows. Like I met a lovely couple from Salt Lake, and I think their podcast is Chris and Chrissy. I'm going to promote you. I Am Salt Lake. They were really lovely people. And again, when you see these people, it's not any, there's no competitiveness. I feel I didn't feel like anybody was trying to squash anybody else's shows. I mean, look here, I've just mentioned 2 people's shows, and I think that's really important, especially given the medium that we're in. And I know there's one of the things I was really getting a lot of at the time was the fear that radio is going to come in and take us over. Somehow they're going to like come in and swoop us up. And the things that kept being pressed upon me were that radio is a push medium. You put on the dial and they basically speak at you. Whereas being a podcaster, having a podcast is a pull medium. In other words, your audience, such as yourselves, if you're listening to me, has to seek you out. They have to download you and they have to listen to you. They can't just change the station. I mean, they could delete your podcast, but the idea for us podcasters is to create an intimate setting. And I hope I'm succeeding in this, because I feel as the Lost Signals, when we started, I guess none of us really know what we're doing. This is kind of like a fairly new medium. And I feel like now that if you watched any of our videos, we now have these comfy chairs. We all sit there, and I feel like we've created more of a discussion now than anything. It's not like we're talking at you, to you, but we're hopefully creating a discussion that you want to be a part of. I'm hoping I'm doing that right now, or, I hope you're still listening up until now. But I enjoyed that aspect of it. I really enjoyed the fact that the idea that this is a pull medium, that things are a little more intimate, really carried through in the lectures, after the lectures. I mean, we'd sit there, you talk to the people that were just speaking for 45 minutes, they'd be there available to continue talking to you, and they wanted to hear what you had to say, and they wanted your information, you wanted their information. I mean, I don't know, I was just really, really overwhelmed by how really cool this whole experience was. I guess I really want to keep going to these. I think they're great. I think the podcast itself, or the movement itself, was really well run. The lanyards that they had these little barcodes on them, and you scanned them with the scanner in the podcast movement app, and your information would be shared with the person you were scanning, and vice versa. So only one person had to scan. I mean, it was like little things like that to me spoke volumes about the thought that was put into this. It is a marathon. I'm going to tell you that right now. If you're a podcaster and you're listening and you haven't gone, you really need to go. But I am going to offer this one little bit of advice. It's a marathon. There's a lot of sensory overstimulation there. You need to get rest. Get a place close by you, or a hotel room. Go and take a nap. Get the sleep the night before, as much as you can, because there's shindigs afterwards, and you're going to meet all sorts of cool people. I finally got a chance to meet these guys that my friends met last year, Cody and all y'all at Rogue Squadron. Hey, another promotion there. So you get talking to all sorts of people you've known, people you've heard of, and people you've just met. So sleep is paramount, and I'm going to tell you why here. I'm going to share this little story with you. I basically hit the ground running. I got up. The B&B we stayed at didn't have carpeting, and it sounded like the people upstairs were like moving furniture at like 6 a.m. So I just ran out, would go to the market, get coffee. I just hit the floor as soon as I can. And you meet up with your colleagues, and you go through the whole day, and then you go through the seminars and you talk, and then there's dinner, and then you talk and talk and talk. And I went back on the last day to just take a nap. I needed to get away from everything. And I was there with my buddy Ian, and I was going through my cards, and I was looking for one card. I couldn't find it. And I found a card for somebody whose name I didn't recognize. Let's call him Bill. And I'm like looking at his card. I'm like, Bill. I'm going through my stuff saying Bill. And Ian's like, dude, get some sleep. He put this quote in from this movie Pontypool that resounded with me. Basically, it said, "You're in a loop. Go sit down or go to sleep. Get 20 minutes of rest, because you're not really doing yourself any good. Your brain's spinning, and you're caught in a loop." And that's kind of what it would be like if you've got to give yourself a breather. It's so wonderful to be around all these people and be so immersive in it. And you want to be there, but by the same time, you have to remember to pull yourself out. That is one thing I had to remember to do. I think that's it. I don't really know what else to say. I'm keeping this under 10 minutes now. If you've listened thus far, I hope I've given you some kind of feedback. I hope I've promoted the shows I have eloquently, and I highly recommend you going. If you haven't been, you go. And if you have been and I've met you, I look forward to seeing you again and hope we talk later in the future. Anyway, this is Chris Morgan from the Lost Signals signing off. Peace and long life.
Wasn't that sweet? Some might describe it as saccharine. Since you heard all the good points about podcast movement, it'll be my duty to point out everything that I found less than desirable about it. First off, I want to suggest that Q&As should probably go away. For every good question, there's at least 2 speeches by self-serving and entitled egomaniacs who I had to actually flee from lest I punch someone in an auditorium. Now, what I picture podcasting to be is a lonely individual sitting in a basement speaking to the vast masses of the internet, hoping for someone to listen. I don't like to see a bunch of happy people running around. It breaks the illusion that everyone is like me. On that note, we also have I have an issue with the glamorization of the podcast movement. Granted, it is fun to pretend that we are celebrities of sorts, getting treated to nice parties and all that, but I find that when someone hands you something shiny, it's generally not for your benefit. So, yeah, there's an illusion going on, and I can pretend for a while that there's fantasy of what podcasting could be. But I'm too cynical to buy into it for very long. Well, I suppose that'll be all of Curmudgeon Corner. Yeah, and granted, I have to say, overall the speeches or the presentations are pretty good, and it is good to network. I leave that mostly to the rest of the crew. I don't like to self-promote, but c'est la vie. I get to play the role of the curmudgeon. So, have a good night, and I hope you enjoyed our overview of what Podcast Movement 2018 was like. And we'll be back next week with our regularly scheduled programming.